in you in style someday. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreaker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Two drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see. We're after the same rainbow's end, waiting round the bend, my huckleberry friend, Moon River and me. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreaker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Two drifters off to see the world.
To you, the White family, the Fallsman family, we gather here this morning for one reason, and that's simply to allow Ron's family to do what their father, their brother, their uncle did throughout his life. Amongst many things, it's to be vulnerable today and to express for them the immeasurable impact of the loss of Ron. We know Ron as a husband, a father, a brother-in-law, a colleague, a friend. We know him in many ways. God knew him most of all by his heart. This is the place where Ron would attend and fellowship. It's interesting that he always sat in the same place, and today, coincidentally, there is another police officer sitting in his exact seat, Brian Connors. I'm wondering if there's a strategic reason why that seat is so poignant. I'll have to test it one Sunday. I want to introduce you to a bit of White family culture. They do a lot of conversation around food. So following this time together will be a chance for you, the extended family here this morning, to share food, to share stories, and I have no doubt to share much laughter. This morning, however, we are here because this family wants to express for them the deepness of their loss and their sorrow. We're going to hear from the family, but first, Ron gets his one and only wish this morning, and that's his hymn, Abide With Me. The family have placed it strategically in the service this morning, not because that's normally where it is, but simply to get it out of the way. As we honour Ron, as we remember Ron, as we give thanks to Ron, as we mourn the passing of Ron for each of us here today, and those who are watching via the stream, and remembering those also who are unable to be with us today. We give thanks to you for joining with us in whatever way that you have this morning. We give thanks, God, for the bigness and the hugeness of the gift of the life of Ron. Thank you for all that he meant to me and to each one here today. Thank you for the gift of his love and his heart, of his example, of his strength, and of his courage. We pray now for the family, that you would provide enough strength as they adjust to the loss. You remember those who can't be here. We ask the same for them. This we pray, giving thanks. Amen.
So good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Peter White, Ron's youngest brother. And I've been asked to read the following from my eldest brother, Brian. Brian lives in Queensland, and he celebrated his 90th birthday in August. We were there. He celebrated it very well, actually. But he's now dealing with his own health challenges. And he's entitled it, Farewell to a Much-Loved Brother. Dear Ron, I regret my inability to be with you today and over the last few weeks. Time and distance came between us, but could never separate us in spirit. Did we get to say goodbye? Perhaps, but I know that we were both trying to do so. I am the eldest of 4 brothers, and only child I was for 8 years. Consequently, my childhood experience of family was brief. It was probably 40 years after Peter was born before we began to share our brotherhood. Ron, I owe you a great deal for helping me return to our family roots. Some 3 years ago, my son Glenn and I went to Thames so that I could spend some time with Ron. And on arrival, we found Ron slumped in his favourite chair, apparently not that well. But our presence was just what he needed. We soon took off for the Coromandel, where, surprise, surprise, we enjoyed oysters at the renowned Coromandel Oyster Company, and then fish and chips at the wharf. As we all know, Ron loved his food. The following morning, we sat down to a light breakfast, a plate of bacon, eggs, and black pudding, a throwback from the old days. Ron was back to his old jovial self, enjoying our company, reminiscing about the old days. It seems that food is a great healer. I had expressed a wish to visit our cousins that we still had in the area, and Ron offered to lend me his car. But I suggested he come with me, so we happily set off together, a road trip of the bros. First up was Tauranga, where we caught up with Marie and Reg. Then on to Cambridge, where Betty anxiously awaited our arrival. A glorious day was had by all. Next day we took off for Huntly, the place where we were born. A visit to the old family home brought back memories of our young lives there. But the highlight of the day was visiting cousin May, the family matriarch, and Betty's brother Graham. These were days well spent, reviving childhood memories, visiting cousins we seldom saw but never forgot. I believe that we each benefited physically and spiritually, and we agreed we should do it again. Sadly, that has not proved possible. However, I was blessed to see Ron when Margaret and I visited our family in Albany last year. They generously hosted Ron for lunch when he made 2 special day trips from Thames to visit us. It was a mammoth effort on his part, given his health. I know that Ron had maintained a close relationship with his church and had a strong sense of the spiritual, but in these later years he showed me a deep and abiding faith. I'll just take a pause there. Thank you, Ron, for sharing your faith and for teaching me the rewards of true brotherhood. I will miss our regular chats, but I'm not far behind you. And until we meet again, keep me a place to share. I'd just like to add just a few thoughts of my own to Brian's. My perspective is very different to Brian's. Ron was my big bro. Up to the age of 10, I grew up with him in the house. Well, he was in the house sometimes, not that often really. My great memories of those days were holidays in New Plymouth every year, where I got to ride pillion passenger on one of his many motorbikes, some of which are on the side of the road at Tiamutu. One is down a bank on the side of Mount Messenger in Taranaki, but that's just how it was. And hey, thanks Ron for giving me the mad desire to have a motorbike. In fact, by the end of, or halfway through my 7th form year, I bought my first motorbike, a BSA 650 Gold Flash. It was aptly named. If you did have any gold, it flashed before your eyes and disappeared down a black hole. So thanks for that, Ron. Other big memories for me was Christmas Day in our home in Huntly. It was a time of mad family fun. Highlight particularly the year that Ron bought a train. Barry was just a little baby, and Dave, Ron and I set it up throughout the house, and Barry didn't get a look in. Ron could play the violin, the tuba, the double bass, and I always recall being so amused that when he got into his violin playing, his mouth would fall wide open. I always found that funny as a little brother. Lorraine and I were married at the ripe age of 19, and you know, Ron did so much to be there for us in so many practical ways, both before we were married and throughout our married life. My late brother David and Ron were inseparable. That they were allowed to be Starsky and Hutch together here in the Thames Police, and by the way, those of you who are younger will have to ask your mum and dad who Starsky and Hutch were, that they were allowed to be here together in the Thames Police said a huge amount about how much they were respected. Lorraine and I moved out of corporate life in Auckland and joined Dave and Ron here in Thames in 1980. And dear old Ron got us all worked up and motivated about building new homes together in the new Regent Heights subdivision. Whoop-de-doo, we helped dig each other's foundations. We took every spare moment we could to help one another. And in fact, the street should have ended up being renamed White Heights. David's basement became Party Central. We moved Mum and Dad to Thames, and they had such a well-deserved retirement together with their whānau here in this town and in this church. And Ron was a huge part of putting that together. Proverbs 17:17 says this: "A friend is always loyal, and a brother is born to help in time of need." Ron was that brother. When Lorraine's father was lost in a tragic boating accident in the Firth of Thames in the late 80s, Ron and David mobilised air, sea, land searches for nearly 2 weeks until he was found. That's the kind of guy he was. A few weeks ago, on one of my visits to see him, I apologised for all the rubbish vehicles that I had bought that he inevitably had to repair. The highlight, I think, being the Bedford camper van I bought, which was seriously underpowered, and I came across some cowboys in Auckland who said they could put a Holden 6-cylinder on it and a Toyota 5-speed box in it, and I said that sounded like a good idea. In the trip back from Auckland to Thames to proudly show it to my brother, in that time something happened. He got under the car or the vehicle when we got home and proudly showed me that every time I'd been using the clutch on the way from Auckland to Thames, I'd been cutting through the side of the oil filter. It wasn't the best of conversions. You know, as I recounted some of these to him just recently up at the house, he just looked at me and grinned. And I'm sure that in this church today, there are a lot of people here today who could list the many practical ways in which Ron had helped in their life. Brian mentioned in his tribute that Ron taught him the meaning of true brotherhood, and I completely agree. I cannot recall any encounters with my brothers that was ever a regretful moment. To me, that's amazing. Ron and I shared deeply with each other around our faith in God, and in the midst of these tough last few months for him, it was stunning to me to hear him express his confidence in God. Our parents lived very humble lives of loving service to all around them. and that shaped a lot of who Ron was. And as I reflected on his life this week, I thought of our parents and their influence on our lives, and it reminded me of the passage in Hebrews 11, where the author is urging his readers, he's urging us, to be inspired by those heroes of faith that have gone before us, people who have lived amazing lives of faith. And I was thinking of that, and then in the next chapter, the author says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us." Well, part of that cloud of witnesses for Ron, Brian, David and myself is our parents. And I know that they will be blessed, so blessed, by the way Ron finished his journey. And he finished it with what matters most, his faith, which was fully intact. Praise God.
Peter, thank you for your example of faithfulness to your brother, particularly for me in his last days, how you prayerfully supported him throughout that. Peter associated Ron with food. I must say that I possibly associate Ron more with women quite often. And in particular, one service, he walked in through those middle doors with a woman on his arm, sat her down, exited, and gathered another, and another, and another, and another. He sat in the middle of them, and I thought they would pop him like a pimple. They could not get any closer to him. That was the reflection, one of the many reflections of the heart of this man. And I trust we will learn and hear more about that. I want to honour the Reverend David Cooper and Archdeacon Joyce Marcon here this morning, who have been caring for and pastorally connected with Ron. It's nice to have you here this morning. We're going to invite May to come now, who is going to read to us.
My name is May Lord. Ron was my cousin, and he was also my godson. I've had 1 or 2 cars in the past years, and who did I go to? Ron, because I trusted him, and he never put a foot wrong. He was a lovely, lovely man. So I'm going to read James 2, verses 4 to 18 and to 22. My friends, what good is it for one of you to say that you have faith if you have no actions to prove it? Can that faith save you? Suppose there are brothers or sisters who need clothing and don't have enough to eat. What good is there if you say to them, God bless you, keep warm and eat well, if you don't give them the necessities of life? So it is with faith. If it is alone and includes no actions, then it is dead. But someone will say, one person has faith, another has actions. My answer is, show me how can anyone have faith without action. I will show you my faith by my actions. Can't you see? His faith and his actions work together, for his faith was made perfect through his actions.
Thank you, everybody, for being here to honour who was my father. And he's meant something to each one of you here. What is the essence of a man who's lived for 8 decades, 3 careers, where he distinguished himself in each. Created a legacy and touched so many people's lives. Dad had a friend, Wally Steen, who's passed away some years ago, and he was full of stories we used to listen to, and he always started them with, "in my book." And by the time Wally passed on, we thought that book had to be pretty bloody big. But Dad's book couldn't fairly be judged by the chapter any one of us walked in on. As I considered Dad's life, poring over thousands of pictures, going right back to just after his birth, was on the slideshow when it was going before, trying to get the essence of my father. In the experience, it was quite beautiful. At times it was funny, and at times it was pretty tough going, and I just finished that period just broken. Who was Dad? Was he that cheeky toddler that we saw on the screen before, reaching up to pick an apple that his mother had told him not to pick? Was he that tall, handsome, smiling man that greeted people as though they really mattered, because to him they really did? Was he that musician that could play so many instruments in the band or in the orchestra? A man I never met, because by the time I come along he was working so hard, 7 days a week, he had to give his music away. And yet, over the years, you could catch him in a quiet moment listening to his favourite music, and a tear would run down his face, a hopeless romantic. Was he that problem solver? He could fix most anything. He could rebuild a car from bare metal. He could help build a house. He built several trailers. He rebuilt electronic gadgets that he had just bought, pulled them apart to see how they worked, put them back together. He could fix other people's problems. Was he that tall, powerful policeman who was fair? He could be gentle and less provoked. He never lost a fight, but he always considered he had failed if he had to resort to force. Was he that family man, always planning the next adventure, fishing and diving with his brothers and our families, walking out in the bush, hunting with his mates, taking the family to new and wonderful places? Was he the man that in some ways redefined emergency management in New Zealand, training programs to create a safer and faster responding network, who was in many ways the architect behind the current Emergency Management Act? Was he that man always buying a bargain, the latest thing that delighted him, however briefly, giving it to anybody that said they liked it? After all, he probably had 3. They were cheaper if you bought 2 or 3. Dad spent way too much money on others, on family, and buying stuff to be rich in any monetary wealth. But he was rich in love, rich in his heart, rich in good humour, rich in a kind word, rich in empathy for others that were hurting. And perhaps his constant pain in latter years helped him have empathy for others who were suffering. So he knew he was not alone. He would count his blessings for the things that he was grateful for, most of all, the love of his family and friends. The answer is, of course, Dad was all of these things and more. In the slideshow that was going before, you would have seen a man that loved life, but did you notice the joy that he had when he was connecting with others, children, and the people that he cared about? And I think that his joy in connecting with people
defined my father. More than the countless hours he spent alone after Helen's passing and in the pain of his latter years. Fiercely independent, alive only thanks to the miracle of modern medicine. I don't know if you're here, Kerry, but if you are, thank you. The year since Dad's soulmate, Helen, passed left him plenty of time to reflect, to deal with his demons, to fight against constant pain, immobility, as Dad's world, once his oyster, began to shrink, smaller and smaller and smaller. Having to deal with being once a man so vital, his mana brought people's attention when he walked into a room, attention he didn't seek. A man who worked so hard, nobody could match him. A man of purpose, doing stuff, fixing stuff, solving stuff, creating better ways, training teams, training leaders, to not being able to do any of those things anymore, other than just life's most basic functions, and come to a place where he could smile. And while he still could, visited others that were worse than him. My father was a beautiful man. He loved intensely. He gave constantly and without counting the cost. He was my hero in life and will forever remain on his passing. That affected so many lives, it created so many memories. We decided, Mike and I, not to throw it out to everybody because the queue would be long and would be, you know, what would really annoy Dad was the fact A, he's getting too much attention, and B, the sausage rolls over there would be going cold. But we'd love to hear stories and memories that you have when we're relaxing over there. It would be remiss, though, for my brother and I not to recount some stories of growing up with Dad. After all, combined, we have 120 years of history with Dad. Dad was a spiritual man, and right now he's in heaven. He's in heaven light. The heaven light is kind of like it's got all the trappings of the normal heaven, but there's no credit card and there's no online shopping. And that's why he's going to need wings. My earliest memories of Dad was driving trucks when I was a baby. He not only drove trucks, he maintained the fleet. He rebuilt one of the trucks with the chassis off rebuild. I love trucks because of my dad. And I loved to be with my dad. And we'd go on trips together when he would go off doing whatever he was, hauling cattle, whatever. And I was only 2. The funny thing when I spoke to Dad about this, he never ever recalled changing my nappy. And my mum's here, and I don't know, but we must have walked in the door at night and my nappy followed me behind somewhere along, dragging on the floor, because I can't recollect it, but I do still love trucks. Between family outings, Dad worked. He worked long hours, sometimes 7 days a week, often at nights, usually working on somebody else's problem and helping them fix it. Once he joined the police, at the bequest of his brother Dave, he eventually got a transfer to Thames, where Dave was, also a policeman, and the Dad and Dave duo was the Thames equivalent of Wyatt and Virgil Earp, taming the Wild West in Thames, and it was a stuff of folklore and legends. I'm still hearing stories. I don't know most of it, I can assure you, but they'd find the biggest, meanest criminals in town, wait for them to cross the line and take care of it, and word would get out. Don't mess with the Thames police, and especially don't mess with the white boys. Dad had enormous courage. He would be by far the bravest man I've ever met. He could and had faced a loaded gun that went off right by his ear as he's trying to disarm the guy. He dived to salvage a body in the Waihau River out here, which is completely pitch black. When your mask goes under that water, there is nothing but a current. Why? Because the family wanted the body and nobody else would be willing to go down there. He would walk into impossible odds. And I've personally witnessed this because I stood by his side because I wasn't going to let him go alone. He'd just walk into impossible odds and then find a way to just walk back with mana and respect. Dad was amazing. Dad's fart jokes were the best, and they were legion. All my children have had to inherit them. He just never ran out of them. Yeah, no, I won't tell those jokes. Maybe another time. Every Saturday, Mum would take Mike and I to church, and Dad would be home working on somebody's car. For free. He'd only charge for the parts, and I just didn't get that. As a kid, I never got it, but every Saturday he'd be there working, and often in the evenings, helping somebody out. I recall him building his own car. He had an Valiant AP6, and he had restored it back to, or taken it back to bare metal, and did all the prep himself, the painting, 7 coats of lacquer, if I recall, rebuilt the engine, and he had requested some people, his mates, to come and give him a hand to get the motor back in, and nobody came. And he's there alone. And I was there, but I was useless. I was about 12 and skinny. I remember watching my father bend down and pick up a complete 225 slant 6. The whole thing. Just picked it off the ground and carried it to the car and laid it into the engine bay. Those things weigh about 400 pound. It's nearly 200 kilo. 2 things went through my head. One was wow, and 2 was never ever piss my father off. When Dad had something that needed doing, he just got it done. I think that buggered his back for life after that, but he did it. Years later, I reflect back on the times that I sat and for a period of time even preached in the church while my father was working for somebody else, helping them without charging for his labour. He was out helping others while I was warming a pew or standing talking to people. And I think, looking back, my dad had it right and I had it wrong. And I was younger and I saw everything in black and white. I saw truth or I saw error. Dad saw the different shades of grey in between, and that gave him his humanity, it gave him empathy. It made him so much smarter than I was when I felt so right. Dad did not die a sudden, unexpected death. It was a long, painful journey, and the end was a mercy. Rest in peace, my beautiful father. I look to see you again. I carry Dad's memories. I remember him as a man of purpose, a man of love, a man of extraordinary courage, of good temper with others. Certainly not a very good temper with inanimate objects that weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. He was calm in a crisis, and I want to be like him in those things. Buying 3 of the same thing because they're on special, the endless gadgets and tools I can't use, not so much. Bless you, Dad. Love you to heaven and back, and I'll see you there when my time comes. I'd like to invite my brother Mike up to share your recollections and experience. And I want to give some context to this because I lived away from Thames for a long time, during Dad's latter years particularly, and so the dad I got was always positive, upbeat. If I called or visited, I got the positive, upbeat dad. Mike was here, day in, day out. Mike got to see the melancholy and sometimes depressed side of Dad, the hopeless romantic. I hear from you, bro.
Oh, the stories. Dad, I watched your world shrink around you. Watched your stubbornness make life hard for you. And it was difficult being your parent. Watching the strong, confident man I knew struggle. And I wanted to mourn the slow demise of my father, but I couldn't because there was always something that had to be done. I had to stay strong for Dad. Your needs were greater. But as Barry said, your life, or anybody's life, can't be judged by the last chapters. And as I had a read through my notes this morning, I had a good ball, and I thought, well, that's going to go well. And I thought about that awful hymn you'd chosen. Oh, we chose the last music. And then I went and changed my shirt and my clothes, and I got rid of the formal attire and thought, no, I'm going to wear a bright shirt, I'm going to wear a pair of jeans. I'm going to celebrate a happy occasion for a good man. Because that's what, Dad, your life was. You're a good man. Ronald was born on 20th November 1940 with strong opinions and a complete inability to clean up after him. He grew up in Huntly, swimming the Waikato River and accumulating an array of animals for his mother to look after. This included cats, dogs, bantam hens, and a goat. Dad was passionate about music and mechanics, two unlikely companions. He played violin, string bass, and various brass instruments in orchestra and band. He rebuilt the engine on his father's lawnmower on a monthly basis, using one of the aforementioned bantam hens to check whether there was current to the spark plug. Music and mechanics, romance and real life, passion and practicality. That was Ronald. I was born when Dad was 22 and spent the next 5 years hiding behind my mother's skirt, hoping that nobody would notice me. On the biannual occasion I would emerge from behind Mum's skirt, I noticed that Dad was tall and handsome, mischievous and funny, gentle and with many hugs, and busy, always busy. Working shift work for the police gave him opportunity to indulge in panel beating and car repairs in any spare time. A move to Thames in 1968 connected us to Mount Moeha in the north and Mount Te Araha in the south, to Monga, the Kauronga River to Awa, the Hauraki Gulf, Te Kapa Moana. As a family we played in the hills, the rivers and the sea, and our connection to the whenua became strong and stayed strong. Rural policing at this time was like the Wild West, with larger-than-life characters muscling up in barroom brawls and altercations that became legend. As a 5-year-old boy, Dad was indeed larger than life. He was a huge man, strong and with presence. He had mana. He commanded respect. And he was still one of the messiest buggers I've ever known. I remember returning home to Thames from a week away with Mum to find the kitchen bench, sink and every available surface piled high with a week's worth of dirty dishes. The long arm of the law didn't quite extend to domestic duties. Growing up in a police home was different. We grew up with emergency call-outs, death, tragedy, and a very raw sense of consequence. I remember Dad coming home one night on his way to dealing with an armed incident. He placed a police revolver on the bench, removed all rounds from the